The failure to act with sufficient ambition to avert the climate catastrophe will be the greatest moral failure of our time.
Making changes takes courage, and if we don't change things, we won't have a future.
I'm an environmentalist. A lot of people don't understand that. I think I know more about the environment than most people.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. Change is coming, whether you like it or not.
Zero carbon.
Eastall. Welcome to Zero Carbonista. I'm Ian Collins, but that's largely irrelevant. If this is the first time you've listened, and shame on you, by the way, some background. This podcast series is really about the views, thoughts, campaigns and ideas of one man. Dale Vince is the entrepreneur who's built his success in the green energy sector. He's the owner of Ecotricity, the world's first green energy company, an area he identified yonks before it was remotely on the political agenda. He's also the chairman of Forest Green Rovers, the world's first vegan football club. We'll come back to that in a few moments. It's been a busy week, Dale, as well, because, of course, we've had Davos, which sounds like a Doctor Who monster to me, but Davos, of course, the forum where, and I can't quite work out, I've never worked out who it's for, really. I understand quite a lot of billionaires go, but then clearly there's other components to this this soiree. You weren't there yourself. I was expecting to see you.
No, never been. Yeah, it's a funny kind of event, isn't it, for... it seems to be for the very rich, influential, not just governments by any means. And Greta went there, of course, this year. It was the 50th anniversary, I think, of Davos.
I think it was.
It seems weird. It seems to kind of, symbolize the degree to which a certain group of people really do have a big influence in our world, the way the world runs. Beyond governments, it's a kind of super government kind of organization, isn't it? Maybe it is an organization of bad guys worthy of Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think David Icke has a field day with these things when he makes his videos talking about the real reason underpinning what's going on. It's a timely moment then to remind ourselves of some of the big players over there in Davos, and of course we might come back to him later in this episode. But we talk about a climate emergency, we talk about environmental catastrophes, and frankly, we've all been wasting our time. Dale, you've been wasting your time because this man has other ideas.
To embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second, but then, great bit of timing, Greta turned up.
The right, the left, as well as the center have all failed. Our house is still on fire. Your inaction is fueling the flames by the hour.
And if you wanted a bit of a royal fanfare, this man showed up too.
We must rapidly realign our own economy to mimic nature's economy and work in harmony with it. We simply cannot waste any more time.
Okay, Dale, so let's just look at this unlikely trio of characters, among many, of course, that showed up. I mean, Donald Trump, as far as I could work out just from watching and listening to this, he sort of went further than he's ever gone, essentially saying there's nothing to see here. We've got a lot of doom mongers out there. We need optimism. We should be optimistic right now. He said America's got the best water and the best air than anywhere else on the planet, etc. There's nothing to see here.
It's funny, isn't it? He said that often about America's water and air. And in the news this week, he's removed all of the protections for America's water that Obama put in place. So he says one thing and does another, Mr. Trump. It's also ironic to me that, he got elected, if anybody remembers, his campaign was very much about tearing America down. There was nothing positive about his campaign. He only talked about how rubbish America was and how he had to make it great again. And yet, when it comes to climate change, which is an absolute existential threat, he says, it's okay, let's be positive. Well, the man's a fool, isn't he?
You'd almost think he made it up as he went along.
Well, that's a good point. I think you're right. He does. I loved what Greta said, by the way. I did on social media see the opening of the speech that she gave, and I thought it was really magnificent. She said she had told people they needed to panic because our house was on fire, and she'd been warned that she shouldn't tell people to panic because it would cause all sorts of problems. And she said, "Don't worry. I can assure you, I've tried it before, and nothing happens." That was fantastic.
I mean, it shouldn't be the order of events, really, should it? That the leader of the free world, the President of the United States of America, stands up and the audience are going, don't worry, but we'll get the real version from a 17-year-old in a minute. I mean, that shouldn't be the way we're thinking, but that's kind of the way we now perhaps have to think.
Yeah, it's a crazy world we live in, no doubt about it.
Then we have Prince Charles. I mean, he's talking about... And I feel a bit sorry for Prince Charles because he's been talking about... And I'm sure someone's got a big old catalogue of environmental things that are not so positive in the royal family. However, he has talked, certainly, at the very least, danced around these issues of the environment for many, many years. I mean, almost written off as a kind of a bit of a fool for even raising some of these issues.
Yeah, I think he was early to the game, wasn't he? And at that time, I think a lot of people were kind of written off as being slightly cranky by focusing on these issues. And he didn't help himself, I think, also by talking to plants to help them grow. I think that undermined him just a little bit.
Yeah,
I've met him a couple of times, and he definitely has a grip on these issues. But I would say, for me, that's undermined by the fact that he's against large windmills.
Why would that be? Why would he be against large windmills? Is that an aesthetics thing or a?
Yes, an aesthetic thing. As far as I can understand from our conversations, it was about the aesthetics. They're a bit big. Didn't mind the little ones. Didn't like the big ones. And I think you can't be a serious environmentalist unless you're prepared to accept that we need to build big windmills.
And it's interesting because I saw, again, you have to be very careful when you try and judge the world through or try and form opinions through what people write on social media. We'll come back to Prince Charles in a second, but I saw somebody saying, actually, it's an urban myth about windmills, and this every now and again there's a stat saying this was the point in the year where we took more of our power from wind than we did from anywhere else or any other source. And somebody had countered that by putting a little kind of image up which showed a dial supposedly saying these are all the methods with which fuel was or energy was created, and wind was about 5%. And this chap was saying it's clearly nonsense that wind is important, it's unreliable, and isn't really working. So what's you built your first windmill in 1996. You know a thing or two about these bladed beasts. What's the score then? What are they producing?
I don't know what period of time that was quoted over. What you just said.
It might have been a reading somebody took at 3:30 in the morning or something. On a cold Christmas night.
That's how it's often done. It's like, oh look, there's no wind today, therefore there's a problem. If you look at last year in Britain, it was over 30% of our electricity that came from renewable energy, mostly from the wind. And you can't deny that statistic over the whole year. Of course, wind comes and goes because it's the weather. The critics of wind energy and renewable energy generally will say that it's unreliable, but what they mean is really that it's driven by the weather, and it comes and goes with the weather. That doesn't make it unpredictable or unreliable, in fact, and it doesn't mean we can't cope with it. And when we run our country more than 1/3, or about 1/3 actually, on renewable energy in 2019, you've got to say that that's the proof of the pudding.
So somebody, for example, goes to a big field and it's full of windmills and none of them are moving around, and they deduce from that, well, therefore they're idle, so the whole system doesn't work.
Yeah,
I mean, the response might be obvious to that, but what is the response?
They're not unpredictable and they're not unreliable just because they come and go with the weather. If you look at a measure called load factor, that gives you a better comparison of how renewable energy performs, and actually it's an eye-opener in terms of how fossil fuel and nuclear power stations perform. So a fossil and nuclear power station may be running at around about 50% load factor. That means that they're only running half the time in general terms. And you might be surprised by that because, it's a machine that you can turn on and turn off. It's absolutely under our control, but they only run half the time. A windmill would probably have a load factor of about 30% in England and about 40% in Scotland or offshore. Okay. So this device that's driven utterly by the weather is pretty close in terms of load factor to a nuclear power station or a fossil-fueled power station.
On that basis, bearing in mind, just going back to Prince Charles, you'd think that would kind of override, okay, the aesthetics don't have to be everybody's idea of what looks okay, but you'd have thought that the basic kind of mathematics and the facts about it that you've just outlined would perhaps override his view.
I think they need to. We unveiled a plan a few weeks ago during the general election campaign, actually, for the county we live in of Gloucestershire, and we did a little bit of work, and we found that if we installed 100 modern windmills, we could power all of the homes in the county, about 250,000 of the homes. So we put this out there as a kind of fact and said to people, actually we've got the choice here in the county. Our district council have got a zero carbon target by 2030, but we said, look, it can be done with just 100 modern windmills, but they have to be on the hilltops. And this is where some people have a problem with them. But this is a really important choice that we have to make. Are we trying to protect the view, or are we trying to protect the environment that we actually live in, the air that we breathe and all that kind of stuff? And I think it's one of the fundamental battles that we've got to fight in order to move to being a zero carbon economy or country and deploy renewables at a much greater pace than we've been able to do so far. Obviously, onshore wind is banned at the moment by the Tory government. That may change, but there is this fundamental problem of landscape preservation, and when we do this, we're only preserving a man-made landscape anyway. The hills in Gloucestershire are not natural; they're very much impacted by farming and by man.
Sure.
And so it's a fundamental kind of philosophical kind of point that we've got to get over.
And did you say the Tory government banned offshore wind?
No, onshore.
Onshore.
Tory government banned onshore wind probably 4 or 5 years ago now, something like that.
So what again? What's the thinking there? Is it kind of in the Prince Charles? Why would you want to ban something that demonstrably works?
I think it was just a thing in the Tory party, a bit like Europe, really, I suppose. But a few Tory MPs were obsessed about it, and they kind of created a false narrative for themselves that wind was unpopular, people didn't want it, and they needed to ban it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that went against every opinion poll, especially the government opinion polls, which they were taking regularly. I mean, it's simply not true that wind energy was unpopular or needed banning.
You think there would be a kind of, I don't know, I often think with these things, when governments do this sort of thing, that even from their own, even if they had to make it up, even if they didn't really believe it, even if they just wanted to look good, you think that Boris Johnson could very easily just go, we're going to have a wind farm frenzy. We're going to build these suckers everywhere we can because they work. It's proven they worked. They're clean. What's not to like? That would tick a whole bunch of boxes. There'd be, many more of those working class people that thought they could never vote Tory might even vote Tory. It would be so easy to do that. And of course, you could say, well, it also keeps happy business because it takes big business to put these things together. And, there is clearly a corporate component to doing this en masse. That would kind of suit the Tories, you might think.
Yeah, I mean, David Cameron promised this, didn't he, at the time of his election? He promised to run the greenest government ever, and it was based on that kind of premise that we were going to have a kind of revolution from the Tory party on green energy. It didn't happen. He actually went the other way. So not only have they banned onshore wind, they've placed a carbon tax on green energy, which is just incredible. It costs us 2 or 3 million quid a year now. Obviously, green energy doesn't make carbon, but if you're an intensive user of energy, you're exempt from the same carbon tax, which is just bonkers. There's going to be 20% VAT on solar panels at your home. That's being imposed by the Tories as well. Wherever you look, there's a raft of anti-green measures. So the Tories are pulling in the opposite direction currently. We can but hope that Johnson, with his new majority, thinks that is something that he can get behind.
So Prince Charles mentioned green taxes. I mean, you touched on something there with this. What do you take as an environmentalist, as a campaigner? What do you take green taxes to mean, Dale?
It's important to bear in mind that we've got taxes everywhere and subsidies everywhere. Our whole economic system is a kind of series of levers that get pushed and get pulled. And at the moment, for example, latest figures I saw were that in the UK, we spend over £10 billion a year subsidising or supporting fossil fuels. And we spend half that much subsidising or supporting renewable energy. So for me, green taxes is potentially a misleading term, but essentially we need to tax pollution, not support it. So we need to remove those subsidies from fossil fuel firms. And we need to increase the support for renewable energy, for electrification of transport, for changing farming and that kind of stuff. It's about giving signals to companies and to people that are financial signals that make it more expensive to do the bad things and make it cheaper to do the good things. So like 20% VAT on solar panels at home is silly, because at the moment, if you buy coal to power your home, you pay 5% VAT. How does that make any sense? So green taxes, I would say actually the better way to describe it is that we need to rebalance the tax system to stimulate good behaviour and penalise bad behaviour when it comes to the environment. So
green taxes aren't solely something individuals would be asked to pay. I mean, corporations, more than anything else, would perhaps be the the recipient of where there needs to be some kind of, if you want to call it a penalty, let's call it a penalty, but a tax nonetheless on corporations causing the damage, or would it be individuals who are buying into it?
I think it would be both. I mean, governments just about tax everything, don't they? Everything that moves, and a lot of things that don't move get taxed. It's a question of applying those taxes to create the outcome that we need, and we need to move away from polluting, consumptive behavior where we have a lot of single-use plastic, for example, and a lot of waste created. We need to move away from that, and one way to do that is to make that cost more. Don't let it be cheap to do that kind of stuff, and those costs will fall on businesses and on individuals. But at the same time, if we reduce the cost of doing the good things, then that gives an alternative path for us all.
Let's talk about Veganuary. Pretty much over. Well, not for you, of course, because you've been doing it for yonks. But there was a date this month that said this is the day that X amount of people fall by the wayside. They gave it a go, and they couldn't get any further, which is kind of...
I've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some people will do it for health reasons and some will do it for ethical reasons. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons. I suppose each individual has their reasons behind it. I mean, what do you do as a vegan? Does it bother you that being a vegan has been made into a fashion almost for 1 month only?
No, because I think Veganuary is like a gateway for people. It's a chance to give it a go and see how you feel. And I think there's nothing more positive than giving people the chance to have a go. It's important that being vegan doesn't look like a cult or a sect or something prohibitive or off-putting for everybody to give a go, because we need everybody to give it a go. And I would say there are 3 reasons to be vegan. There's not a multitude, there are only 3. One is respect for animals. The other is the climate impact of animal farming, and the third is the human health impact of eating animals. And there's very clear science behind the two, the climate impact and the human health impact. And there's a huge moral problem with the way that we farm animals. And people choose one or all of those 3, and I don't care. I think it's fantastic that the world is moving this way.
You sell vegan pies, of course, at Forest Green Rovers. You can't buy meat pies at Forest Green Rovers. But I noticed this week that Chelsea are now selling vegan pies.
Yeah, they opened a vegan-only food stall or stand
at Stamford
Bridge. Yeah, which is just amazing.
I wonder where they got that idea from.
Yeah, well, we've been in touch with them, and we're going to meet them soon, and to share ideas and stuff like that, which is fantastic. But what really tickled me is that there's one picture that made all the news outlets for this story, and it's a guy being served at this new vegan stand. And he's a Forest Green fan. He's wearing his Forest Green scarf, which is really funny.
Brilliant. Unveiling of the Chelsea vegan stand, and there's a Forest Green Rover, so you can't keep them away, you see.
First in the queue.
It's interesting. We've got a question on that point. Jamie on Twitter says, I'm a vegan living in Manchester. Can I buy your burgers or pies anywhere else? I work at weekends, so I can't get to the club.
Not yet, I would say.
You said that like there's news to come, Dale.
But yeah, there is. I mean, we've firmly got it in our minds, but we're getting such a great response from the wholesale catering trade. We started out in primary schools. We're now in universities and across the whole spectrum of education. We're expecting to be in a few football clubs soon, Premier League clubs as well as others. And we've started to talk about how do we get this into supermarkets? How do we turn it into a retail product? We probably will trial it at the club. So that at the end of the game, fans can buy frozen stuff to go home with. But it's definitely on our agenda, I hope, for some time this year.
I know, I can tell you, I don't want to lecture you on business or anything and go all Dragon's Den on you, Dale, but I know what you have to do. You've got to have a picture of your face and the word uncle in front of it. Because it worked for the rice people, didn't it? I mean, they did rather well out of it. And Paul Newman's salad dressing, whatever the heck it is, that's his face.
Yeah, that's true. But he's probably more famous than me. I'm not sure about Uncle Ben. I don't know how it worked for him, but it did.
Uncle Dale's pies. I'm sold. There's got to be something in there. I noticed one of the big awards ceremonies recently, the Golden Globes, wasn't it, where the canapes and everything were only vegan or something.
Yeah, it was brilliant and about time. I've been to a couple of UN events, and after all of the good talk about what we need to do to fight the climate change, you go into the canteen at lunchtime and there's just a sea of animal products. Yeah. And you go, well, what's happening here,
If Colonel Sanders were alive today, do you think he would still give it a go with the chicken parlours?
I have no idea. But I think if he were alive to date, my inclination would be to stick him into an intensive chicken shed and see how he liked the experience.
You see, that would be a Netflix show we'd all watch, wouldn't it? Sanders in the shed. I mean, who wouldn't watch
and we'd
that?
get Ronald McDonald and stick him in a cow-rearing shed.
All of your favourite characters would be there. Maybe Uncle Ben would make an appearance. This in from Tim on Facebook, who says, saw you on the TV talking politics recently. Do you fancy having a go in 2024? I know you've been asked this before. You've been involved with political parties, and we've talked a lot on previous podcasts about where you think politics should go. What about doing it yourself, Dale?
Yeah, I think I have said before that recently I've started to wonder whether getting involved in politics might be a pathway to kind of having more impact, whether I'd done enough using business as a method to bring change, and whether now is a good time to try and use politics to bring more change. And, that's kind of live discussion in my mind. 2024 is a long way off, and I really don't know what I'm going to be doing by then, but I wouldn't rule it out or in.
Here's one from Robin on Facebook. Have you seen the BBC are doing a year of climate change content? Is it too little too late, or a good thing?
Yeah, it can't be too little too late, in my opinion. I think, we as a world aren't doing enough to fight climate change, but we can't give up. And, year-long climate change event from the BBC can only help. The Blue Planet series had a big impact on people's consciousness. All of that stuff people see about plastic has a big impact. And, I think the rise of veganism is down to the availability of information that we have now about the conditions in factory farms and the climate impact of animal farming. And I think that's behind this rise in the consciousness of people, which is changing our behaviour.
And this one from Simon. Instead of podcasting, why not fix the electric highway?
Well, when I get off...
Can you explain the context behind the question then, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, we run a national network of charging points in Britain. I think it was one of the first in the world. We got started in 2011. We cover most of the motorway service stations with the biggest charging network in Britain by volume. There are probably 10 networks now. I would say there are 3 large ones that might consider themselves to be national, and we probably supply twice as much energy as the next biggest one, which has far more pumps. We've got about 300 pumps. Our nearest rival's probably got about 5,000 or something like that. And our tech is quite old because we started in 2011. And we've had some problems with it. We just replaced 6 that are almost completely dead. Just put those in just before Christmas. That's what we're doing at the moment. We're trying to replace the worst of our old fleet as we get ready to put in the 150 kilowatt chargers. It's known as HPC, high-powered charging. And the cars that can use that level of power, they're coming this year from all the major manufacturers. So, the EV world's going through a big transition. Charging standards are changing. There are 3 at the moment in the world. I think it'll reduce down to 1. To the European standard, CCS, and I think it will hover around 150 kilowatts. I think a few exotic cars will be able to take 300 kilowatts, like a Porsche and stuff like that, but I don't think that will become the de facto standard. So I think we're close to the end game in terms of standards of chargings and powers of charging, and our next job is to upgrade our network again to to be at that level. So that's what we'll do. So as soon as I get off air, I'll pick up my bag of screwdrivers, Tim, and I'll go out and have a fiddle.
Up every highway in the country. Let's just finish where we began with our friend Mr. President. And this time, and this was really something else. I mean, every time he surpasses himself, Dale, every time we play an excerpt. I think he probably listens and thinks, next time, so they've got material for the next episode, I've got to say something even more stupid than I said last time. And so this is Donald Trump talking about dishwashers.
But I'm also approving new dishwashers that give you more water so you can actually wash and rinse your dishes without having to do it 10 times. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Anybody have a new dishwasher? I'm sorry for that. It's worthless.
I mean, did you know there was a limitation on water of dishwashers, Dale, in the US? And Donald Trump's Uncle Donald's going to fix it. So
I didn't know, and I'm sure most Americans didn't know and notice either. I mean, dishwashers are pretty efficient with water anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's their big advantage. But he's the gift that keeps on giving.
He's made America great again by putting more water in the dishwashers, which is very few presidents. Abraham Lincoln never did that kind of stuff. So, got to give Donald some credit for this. And on that point, that is it for this episode. Dale, we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Ian.
And don't forget, of course, you can subscribe for free from your podcast provider so that you get every single episode automatically. Do make sure you leave a review as well. Really important bit this. Make sure you follow Dale on social media, twitter.com/DaleVince or facebook.com/DaleVince. And we will see you on the next episode.
Zero Carbon
East of